from a lay point of view, it seems like if you were to set a very a low price cap or lower it, then how is the money made up? If it's not the ferry company that makes it up, would it be that the government then says, oh, we have to increase our subsidies? Obviously not that simple, but it sounds like it might be.
Yeah, well, it isn't that simple. You know, if you read the whole act, you'll see it's very prescriptive. So we have to consider certain costs and certain information, and then deliver a price cap high enough to cover the costs and deliver the return on equity and so on.
Could you give us some examples of what kind of things you consider?
Well, as I say, the company brings in their cost projections for everything. Maintenance costs, their labor costs, you know, all mapped out over the forthcoming years of fuel costs. And you know, we're able to ask them questions and sort of go back and forth to confirm that they are in fact reasonable projections and so on. But if they are...
What's an example of a reasonable projection, maybe compared to an unreasonable?
I don't know, if picking in, they project their fuel prices, for example. And you know, we get to say, well, how did you come up with that prediction? You know, where did you get your advice, and was it credible advice, and so on. But at the end of the day, you know, we have to accept reasonable answers to our questions. But anyway, then we assemble all the costs, and as I say, there's a formula in the act that we have to apply to set a return on equity. So we lay that on top, and we have to set the price cap in order to cover that. So that's the preliminary price cap point. What happens then is, based on that finding, the government, the company enter into contract negotiations, and that's where the discussion takes place about service fees and any changes to service levels and anything else that the government and the company want to agree to. They then give us back the information, and if it has changed the cost profile, then we would adjust the price cap accordingly. But at that point, it becomes a fixed price cap for a 4-year period.
Sounds very vague.
So it's fascinating. I mean, you can understand why we had a lot of questions, you know, as we tried to imagine how to do it.
If I might, the whole model that we have now under the Act is a cost recovery model. Whatever BC Ferry's costs are.
All right, that's
right?
the basic point.
So they're entitled to recover those costs through fares, subsidies, ancillary revenues, and so on, plus an additional amount, which is their return on equity, profit, if you like. And that, under the Act, that's what's deemed to be necessary for them to service their debt obligations. They've gone out and borrowed a lot of money to purchase all of these new vessels, and they need that cash flow to pay the bondholders. So that's the theory and the model. I hope I haven't made it
No,
So
that's much
it's a cost recovery. They recover the costs, plus they're entitled to earn a return on their equity that enables them to service their debt obligations. Now the question is whether that's too much, whether that model is the right model to have, and so on.
Whatever it is, it's the customer who pays.
Pardon me?
Whatever it is, it's the taxpayers who pay, the customers who pay.
It's the customers plus the taxpayers in the form of the subsidies, the service
Their
levels. Yeah.
Bridget, we interrupted Fred's question.
And it's Fred Hunt that should mention. Thank you. Just comments along with the previous comments. The idea of the business model is very difficult when considering something that should be, I think, service-driven. It just doesn't fit well. I like Tony's point about having in the principles a user pay, where user pay is undefined, is awkward and seemingly unworkable. Struck by Pete Kimmerly's comments about in fact, the pride that was there in the fleet, the ferry fleet for BC in Bennett's time, or when it was first being built, and it was that pride was shared. And if it has gone to the point where we have a company at war with its employees, which I don't know that firsthand. My first-hand experience of employees of the ferry is universally positive, especially here. From that point of view, it's a very good service. But if that is occurring, I think that's a culture that is very worrisome. And in these days, if you like, of modern management, something that just doesn't ring true. It should not be happening. It's because it's proven to be not cost effective, if you want to put that in a business model. It's a whole lot better to have a culture that with everybody in a marine format, everybody going together, just sprung to mind, yes, in the same direction.
That would reduce fuel costs.
Yes, it would do that. I'm not recommending rowing. The other thing from a point of view, from Hornby's point of view, one of the significant factors here in terms of our community is a notable reduction of younger people in the community, reference to schools, population dropping. The fact of increasing ferry fares is a factor in all of that. I think the uncertainty, definitely, if I were a younger person with a family, growing family, there's lots of things to consider about moving to an island. Obviously, not just ferry cost, the ferries themselves, but clearly that has to be a factor when we have this dramatic increase and apparently no control over that that it could well continue to rise and to become more and more a factor and more drive Hornby residents to being a place where people with significant income can stay. And if you haven't got some sort of significant income, then it's less and less an option.
Okay, Betty.
Yes, I'd like to put out a question about why isn't ferry management part of the business expenses? And is there any group that oversees that part of it? For what I'm thinking of is the fact that the ferries chose to move into a hugely more expensive building for their administrative offices. And that could add immeasurably to the cost of running the whole affair, as well as the typically high salaries of Mr. Hahn and others. But has that ever been justified? Has anybody ever questioned that? That they didn't really need to move?
So we did question that, and they gave us an explanation.
Did they?
Yep, they did on the office decision. It's very complicated, and I couldn't pretend to sort of recite it back to you right now, but they did make a pretty good deal on this new facility, and they've got some really good sort of leasing arrangements in it that they're able to make the case that they have saved money by consolidating their people and moving into a different facility. I need to study it a lot more, but certainly we did have the opportunity to ask the question, and they did have a very well made case around that particular issue. The salaries question you're asking, the governance model for the ferry system has a board of directors for the company. They set the salaries for the executive compensation. And there's also a board of the BC Ferry Authority that appoints the board of the company. So there's a couple of layers of governance there, but those kinds of decisions they don't reside with the commission. They're with the boards that oversee the company.
Also, if I may, that was something that was addressed in the Controller General's review, and that happened last year, was it? And was addressed in the legislation that now there is a formula with respect to the hiring of senior management. So when now Mr. Hahn has resigned, the next person that's hired will be subject to that formula that relates more to public service salaries than to major company salaries. So there's a ceiling being established. I've got three people, Doug, Carol and Richard, want to speak here. Has anybody who hasn't spoken the first time that's got something to say before we go into the second round? Go ahead.
I'll be very brief, because what I would have said has been already said. I just want to commend everybody who's spoken so far. I think there'd be a lot more people here, but I think, well, one thing is the power outage. When there's a power outage, everybody's energies go to survival, and your world becomes very small. And so perhaps that's part of the reason people maybe forgot about it or whatever. But I also think there's maybe a general level of almost, I hate to call it apathy, but just sort of a giving up feeling. I heard a little bit of that from Tony. That feeling that it's just like, what's the point? Now, you're here anyway, and some of us are here anyway, but I think a lot of people, when they get to that, what's the point? There's nothing we can do anyway. That's a very dangerous thing in a community. It's really dangerous. When the fares first went up, we had demonstrations down at the ferry, and people had placards, and there was a lot of energy around it. There were 2 or 3 of those demonstrations over on the Buckley Bay side and on the Hornby side. And but over time, people, they get kind of worn down, and it's very complicated too. And there aren't a lot of people that have maybe the energy or the time or the brain space to figure it all out. And we've had excellent people on our ferry advisory committee meeting, so you kind of tend to delegate, well, they're looking after it, So I think the show to people today in no way is representative of the feelings on the island about this whole thing, because if people come out with their feelings, you guys might have to run for your lives, even though you're not. They wouldn't blame you, because people will figure that out. But, that needs to go somewhere, that anger. And we're fortunate right now. We have our son, our youngest son, and we have 4 children, 5 grandchildren. Our youngest son and his partner and our new granddaughter, Ivy, who's 8 weeks old, are here to visit us for the first time. And we built, when you spoke, you spoke my words. We built our place as a family gathering place because nobody else had a place big enough. And we thought they'd be able to come frequently, and we've got lots of beds. We don't have a big house, but we have lots of beds and tucked away places and tent platforms and what have you. They come very, very rarely. And we subsidize. I thought maybe we were the only people on the island doing that, but these guys are here with a ferry ticket to Hornby that was a birthday present, because they can't do it. We've got one son paying a big mortgage in Vancouver. They're going to have to pay $200 with little kids to come up here. They're not going to come for Thanksgiving weekend. They probably could have managed that, but there's just no way. So we end up with our senior thing, thank God for that, go down to Vancouver, where we hate to go because we don't like the city. But we go down there way more often than we would like, because we don't want to be strangers to our grandchildren. And so it has changed. We came up in the fateful year, 2003. Yeah, that was the year the ferry started to change. Who knew this was all going to happen? It was not part of anybody's planning. And we went camping up to Burns Lake and went on that free ferry over to, what's the name of that lake? Some of you know it.
The Upper Hole Lake.
Anyway, we went on this free ferry.
South Bank.
A beautiful thing, runs every hour, and it goes to no place. It goes to
South
a place like Hornby Island, where there's a few lakes, people come fishing, population goes up in the summer, but it runs every hour free. We go to Kingston to visit our oldest son in the winter, and there's the Wolf Island ferry. Wolf Island is no place. It's just a rural area with a few farms and things. Got a few wind turbines now. But it runs every hour, even in the winter, through the ice. Back and forth, and it's free. Other places do this. And it just doesn't feel right to be held hostage because of an ideology. And that's what it is. When you see those 10 points, they're all garbage. I mean, if we're basing this whole thing on 10 points that are garbage, no wonder people give up. Thank you.
I didn't actually pitch you.
Sharon. Rogalsky. R-O-G-A-L.
That's what I don't think.
Always have to
If I could just say one thing about the number of people that were able to come today. I mean, first of all, I get it. It's partly about the...
Can you speak up a little? Sorry.
I just wanted to talk to the point you made about the number of people who were able to make it today. We get it, you know, the hydro's out and people are probably pretty focused on dealing with that.
And working.
And all those things. Sheldon and I have been trying, we are the whole Ferry Commission, by the way, 100% of it. We don't have any secretaries or any staff or anything else. And we've been working our way up and down the coast and doing a lot of meetings. So there's just a reality to how many places you can get to in an evening or on a Saturday. And we've been doing both on a regular basis. But I also just wanted you to know that this size of group for us is actually much better to be able to have a conversation and really get some thoughtful ideas on the floor. I don't mean this to come out wrong, but last night, you know, we were at a meeting with over 250 people, and we advertised exactly the same way that we did for this meeting. And you know, we got a lot of information, but it wasn't a conversation. It's just, you know, all you can do is just listen to what, you know, a handful of people can say in the time that you've got. So I certainly hope nobody's disappointed with the size of the group. As far as we're concerned, this is about as good as it gets. To have, you know, a small group of people who are thoughtful and came out. I mean, you're obviously more interested than everyone because you came, and it really is more productive in many ways for us. So, you know, I just wanted to comment on what you said.
Well, the ferry was shut down for 6 hours yesterday, and that included all our high school kids that went to town. So there's a lot of people that aren't here that didn't get home yesterday, and they're not coming home until the power's on.
Yeah.
How are you doing for time? Just checking.
Oh, you time, Don?
5 to 12.
Yeah, we're pretty much gonna have to.
So what's the time now? Okay, so you're on the 2 o'clock. Okay, so there's a bit of time. Okay. Did you want to speak there? Yeah, Mary, then we'll go to people for the second time. Yeah.
My name's MacKenzie. I'm sorry I'm late. I was dealing with freezers and trucking and stuff.
That's why we made you sit over there.
I'm part of the arts community here, and it's a very big aspect. I don't know if you've just, has anybody addressed this yet?
No.
It's a very big aspect of the island, and I came here 37 years ago as an artist, and also put together a living by being a secretary at school and doing freelance computer work. So a lot of us have had to put together little bits and pieces of living, particularly in the arts community. And the fact that people who have known Hornby Island as an arts community no longer come here because of the ferry fares is very, very difficult for those of us in the arts field. It's, I know from our small gallery down at the co-op that the sales have been much lower this year. Before the gallery movement was down on Central Road, the sales have dropped. By the time the ferry fares went up, our sales were going down. And it's a real hardship for an artistic community to deal with this. It's not only prevents people from coming, but it also prevents us from taking our work off to a larger market. So it's a very, very noticeable change in that element of the community.